Hi, and welcome to Bacharach's webinar on EPA Section 608, specifically the 2019 Refrigerant Compliance Checklist and Guidelines. We'll be your hosts. My name is Tony Powell, Strategic Account Manager.
And my name is Adam Marsh, and I'm the Product Manager for Refrigerant and Energy Management.
And let's start off with a quick background to Bacharach, the company itself.
Yeah, sure. So this year is actually Bacharach's 110th birthday. We have a long-standing experience in gas detection, in particular in refrigerant, and as such have been significantly involved in refrigerant management and the associated markets. We have installed hundreds of thousands of our refrigerant gas detectors globally. As an organization, our mission is to make the instruments and data solutions that make HVAC and refrigerant safer, cleaner, and more energy efficient.
So let's get started with this presentation. The basis of the presentation is specifically on the 1st of January, the final revisions to EPA's Section 608 Recycling and Emissions Reduction Program came into effect. Different aspects of the program came into place in 2018 and 2017. Not everything has changed, but here we will walk through the key aspects of the legislation as they stand now, post January 1st, 2019. These are the topics we'll be going into much more depth on the following slides. Adam, would you give us a brief rundown on what changes now with the EPA 608 after January 2019 on each of these?
Yeah, certainly. So on the record-keeping front, this has continued from previous revisions, but the scope of what equipment record keeping is required for has increased post-2019. Leak rate calculations remain central to compliance, and again, although they haven't changed, we're going to go over them here just to make sure that's thoroughly understood by the audience. Equipment leak thresholds define when actions are required on appliances, so a deep understanding of that is key, and these have also reduced post 1st of January. The leak repair timeframes, leak inspection requirements, and retrofit and retirement timescales all remain some of the critical areas of compliance for equipment. It's really important that the right actions are done in time. This is central to compliance, and so we'll go into some detail explaining these. And lastly, brand new for 2019 is the requirement to report annually to the EPA on chronically leaking appliances, and so we'll explain what that means too.
Number 1, robust record keeping. Record keeping is the number one responsibility for equipment owners and operators. Records are the means of proving that the regulations have been followed, and the EPA clearly assigns a responsibility for record keeping of operational equipment on the equipment owners or operators. As we highlight here, asset maintenance and operational records are required for all equipment with over 50 pounds of Class 1, Class 2, or non-substitute refrigerants. We'll clarify those in just a moment. In a far lower size threshold exists for refrigerant removal. Refrigerant removal records are required whenever refrigerant is removed from any appliance with only 5 or more pounds of refrigerant. All records must be kept for a minimum of 3 years. So, when are the records required?
So, records are required whenever an appliance, a refrigeration circuit, is maintained, serviced, repaired, or disposed of. And so that includes doing inspections, adding refrigerant, doing a repair on that appliance, as well as, of course, any retrofit or retirement activities as well.
Great, thank you, Adam. What type of records do we have to keep?
So if the EPA come to inspect, they will need to ask you to be able to identify and locate all of your refrigeration equipment. You'll need to know what the full charge size is, any dates that any work was carried out, any parts or components of the equipment that were worked on, the type of work, was it a repair, so on and so forth, who carried it out, if refrigerant is added, what refrigerant and how much, and whenever you add refrigerant, the leak rate must be recalculated, but we'll come on to that in just a moment. And also the results from any inspections, checks, verifications are needed, and any plans for retirement or retrofitting the appliance, and the schedules for those activities will need to be demonstrated. Further, you also have the ability to ask for an extension for these work, provided particular criteria exist. And if you've done that, you will also need to prove that you have requested that extension to the EPA.
Perfect. Thank you, Adam. And just to clarify which refrigerants are covered by this, as I mentioned before, it's Class 1, Class 2, and the non-exempt substitutes. Class 1 are the very high ozone-depleting refrigerants, like the CFCs. Class 2 are the still relatively high global warming potential, but also with ozone depletion potential refrigerants, like the HCFCs, for instance, R22. And then the non-exempt substitutes would be your HFCs and HFOs, which have no ozone depletion potential, but have mid to high global warming potential. What you don't need to keep records on are the exempt substitutes, such as the natural refrigerants like CO2, ammonia, propane, isobutane, and those types, which have no ozone depletion potential and very, very low global warming potential. So for the second part of our checkpoint here, let's get into the leak rate calculations. We have here up on the screen here, there's two different ways to calculate it. There's an annualizing method and a rolling average method. We find most people tend to use the rolling average method. And yeah, so Adam, could you explain the rolling average method and then maybe perhaps go through an example?
Sure. Yeah, so it's just much clearer and simpler than the annualizing method, and so we recommend using that. The EPA simply state that the same method must be used for all appliances across your record keeping. So whichever one you do choose, just make sure you're consistent. And also the leak rate must be calculated every time refrigerant is added or removed from the appliance. So the rolling leak rate simply takes the amount of refrigerant added over the last 365 days for your appliance and divides it by the amount of refrigerant in the full charge. Multiplying by 100 gives you the percentage. So ultimately, in the example, if you have a full charge of £2,400 and over the last 365 days you've added 200, that's a leak rate of 8.3%. Now that £200 might be just one addition, or it might be multiple additions that sum up to that £200. The key thing is you're taking the total amount that has been added over the last 365 days. And hopefully that makes that clear.
Thanks. So for point 3 of our checklist, let's get into the equipment leak thresholds. Starting January 1st this year, the thresholds have reduced, and it depends on which category. So for industrial process refrigeration, the threshold was 35%. It's now down to 30%. For commercial refrigeration equipment, we've gone from 35 down to 20, which is a big drop. And comfort cooling appliances went from 15 down to 10%. And again, this is the annual rolling leak rate, and the EPA refers to it as the applicable allowable leak rate. So if you exceed this, it doesn't mean you're non-compliant, but it does mean there's some extra things you need to do. Adam, can you explain this in a little more detail for us?
Yeah, absolutely. So what it does mean is that for all equipment that exceeds its applicable allowable leak rate, actions must be taken to bring the leak rates below these levels. In particular, locating the leaks, repairing them, and verifying that these repairs and ongoing inspections are complete. And we will go into those in our later checkpoints in more detail. Now, these actions will need to be completed until it can be demonstrated that the annual leak rate can be shown to be under its threshold for a total of 12 months. A further point just to notice on this is that if an appliance falls into neither of these three categories here, it would be categorized as other, and anything that falls into that category, the 10% leak rate applies.
For point 4 of our checklist, let's look at the leak repair timeframes. Just for clarity, these have not changed as of January 1st, 2019, but we want to go over them to make sure everyone's up to speed. So it's 30 days for commercial appliances, commercial applications, or 120 days for industrial process refrigeration. you can have extensions to these when certain criteria are met. Adam, could you explain what criteria would get you an extension?
The EPA specify 3 criteria, one of which would need to apply to get an extension. The first is the appliance is located in an area subject to radiological contamination, or shutting down the appliance would lead to a risk of that. The second is that requirements of other regulations make a repair within this time frame impossible. Or thirdly, components that must be replaced as part of the repair are not available within the 30 or 120-day time frame. If you are applying for an extension, there are specific documentation requirements that you need to cover, and you must submit this request to the EPA before your 30 or 100 days is up. You are at that point, however, welcome to assume that the extension has been granted unless the EPA get back to you.
For point 5 on our checklist, let's get into the leak inspection requirements. As we discussed earlier, if the appliance actually exceeds its allowable leak rate, then we need to get into some additional requirements, and these requirements are inspections. We'll have different inspections depending on what type of equipment it is and also the size of the charge in the equipment. So here on the slide here, we can show you what the sizes are and the time frame for the inspections. For commercial and industrial applications, it's going to be every 3 months if you're over 500 pounds of refrigerant, and it's annually if it's between 50 and 500 pounds. For comfort cooling, anything above 50 pounds is an annual inspection. Adam, do you have any more detail you want to share?
So the inspections are required until you can demonstrate that the rolling leak rate is under its threshold for a total of 12 months, which means that if you had one big addition, let's say in January, the leak rate wouldn't drop below that threshold until the following January, and you still then have to demonstrate that it's below that for another 12 months. So ultimately, really, these inspections are going to be for a 2-year cycle. However, you can actually avoid the need to do quarterly or annual leak inspections if you have installed an annually calibrated automatic leak detection system, such as the Backrack MZ, that continuously monitors and samples for refrigerant leaks. A key element here is that the equipment must be able to detect a concentration level of 10 parts per million or lower.
Great, thank you. For point 6, let's cover the retrofit and retirement timeframes. As we mentioned, sometimes the equipment is exceeding its allowable leak threshold, and for that you need to apply a repair, and in some cases a repair doesn't fix the equipment. It doesn't come under its allowable threshold, in which case we need to discuss how retrofitting or if we retire this equipment, and there's the EPA covers this in quite a bit more detail. Adam, could you go into the specifics on this?
Yeah, so there are 3 key steps to the process. Firstly is documenting the decision to retrofit or retire your equipment. Then the submission of a plan, and then acting on that plan. So for example, retrofitting will involve removing refrigerant, making any modifications to the equipment, and then the addition of the new, different refrigerant that falls into the substitute refrigerant section that we discussed earlier. On the retiring front, that will involve removing refrigerant and the documentation on that, as well as the documentation of the decommission and removal of the appliance and who that went to.
Is there a time frame we have to hold to here?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So the documenting the decision must be made within the repair time frame, which was the 30 or 120 days we just discussed just now. The plan for your retrofit or retirement must come within 30 days of that decision. And then the actions acting out your retirement or retrofit must be within 12 months of the plan. And detailed documentation of each of these steps is required to be kept by the equipment owner to be able to be demonstrated to the EPA.
And that's also has to be kept for 3 years, as stated earlier?
Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you. For the last point, let's cover chronically leaking appliance reporting. The EPA specifies chronically leaking appliance as any appliance that's leaking more than 125% of its total charge annually, or as a running average over the last 12 months. So how is this requirement different than our previous requirement for the leaking or the decommissioning of leaking equipment, Adam?
So the key difference here is that to present your reporting to the EPA for all other elements is on demand of the EPA. So they come and knock on your door and you need to demonstrate your record keeping. With this one, it's mandatory that you deliver it to the EPA.
So you need to be proactive on this one.
That's right, yeah. You need to deliver it before March the 1st of the following year. And it needs to detail the efforts and actions that you are taking to repair this appliance in particular.
Got it. That makes sense. So that concludes our discussion of the EPA Section 608 checklist, where we went into some detail on the specifics of what the EPA requires, specifically what changed for 2019, this past January 1st coming into effect. The links that were in those slides to the EPA are listed on this webpage. Feel free to click on them and get more detail about what the EPA requires on each of these points. And it may seem rather complicated to follow rather onerous to comply with all these requirements for the EPA, but Bacharach does make this simpler for you. And we have with our refrigerant management products and services, we can simplify this task for you. And we'll go into a little more detail on this. Bacharach can support you here in two ways. First, we have industry-leading fixed and portable leak detection, and we have refrigerant management software that'll help you track this and stay compliant. On the refrigerant management hardware side of it, we have the HDM MZ refrigerant leak detector. And this is industry-leading leak detection, which will detect leaks down to 1 ppm and can monitor up to 16 different areas via an aspirated refrigerant monitor, and can track over 50 different refrigerants accurately over your entire enterprise. And also, continuing on with the same theme, we have the same technology that's in our wall-mounted leak detection system we have in a portable system. So it'll also give you down to 1 ppm refrigerant leak detection in a portable package, which can be used by your technicians to pinpoint the exact leaks in your systems. And to really simplify compliance with EPA 608, we also offer the Parasense platform, which Adam will go into a bit more detail on.
Thanks, Tony. The Parasense platform is designed to simplify compliance and support your refrigerant management strategy to reduce your refrigerant consumption and costs across your enterprise. It's available online, so technicians and equipment owners can access it to make and review records, analyze and report refrigerant usage, and of course your compliance status. So we have distilled the legislation actions down into procedures and tasks that are easy to follow and implement. And we call this our regulation workflow. And this just lays out simple step-by-step actions to take to work through each of the requirements of EPA. The required records are split across each process, so you can be confident as you work through each step that all your records are being kept and compliant with the EPA needs. And all the required actions, such as repairs, inspections and tasks for retiring or retrofitting, are scheduled in the compliance calendar. So this allows you to plan and coordinate your internal and external teams and partners. The refrigerant reporting provides full visualization of your refrigerant consumption across all appliances, all sites across your enterprise, so you can identify your best practices and opportunities for improvement. And then also, compliance reporting is available on demand in one click, including EPA, Green Chill, and CARB.
Thank you very much for your attention for this webinar about the EPA 608 checklist. Below, on top of the EPA links we discussed earlier, we will also have a link to our EPA 608 checklist, and also a link to sign up for a demonstration of the ParaSense platform.
Oh yeah, sign up and we'll personally give you a demo. In particular, we can guide you through the compliance calendar and the regulation workflow to show how these features save you time, provide confidence in your compliance, and ultimately drive down refrigerant consumption and cost. So please do sign up for this offer of a free demo. Follow the link below.
Thank you very much. We welcome your comments and suggestions. Please use the comment section below. And again, thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody. Bye for now.